Story time about how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm now 24, but 10 years ago, a new girl moved into our town. Her and I quickly became best friends in school. She would always come over to my house and have dinner with me and my parents. My parents really grew to love her because she was so polite and really cared about me. The only thing was that she never wanted me to go over to her house. At first, I thought it might be because she was embarrassed of her house or something. And eventually I asked her and she told me that her dad was abusive towards her mom and that was the reason why she didn't want me to come over. I felt terrible that she had to live like that, so I expressed to my mom that I was really concerned about her. So my mom actually asked my best friend if she wanted to come live with us for a little bit. Let's call my best friend Sarah. Sarah said no because she wanted to be with her mom. But my mom really wanted to help Sarah and her mom. My mom was in an abusive relationship herself when she was younger, so she understood what Sarah and her mom were going through. My mom decided to invite Sarah's mom over for dinner. That's when my mom asked her about their living situation, and Sarah's mom confessed that it was pretty bad. My mom suggested that she should try to get a divorce, and a few weeks later, she filed for divorce. We were also happy because this meant things would get better for Sarah and her mom. And things did get better. Her dad moved out to his own apartment, and a few weeks later, he had a new girlfriend. I was able to stay over at Sarah's house, and it was really fun. One of the times that I was with Sarah at her house, her dad showed up. But he started making me feel really uncomfortable. He told Sarah that I was the prettiest friend she'd ever had. I could see him staring at me. After he left, Sarah apologized. I went home and tried not to think about it. A few days later, I was walking home when Sarah's dad pulled up next to me. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. One day that I was at Sarah's house, I decided to walk home instead of calling my mom to pick me up. As I was walking home, Sarah's dad pulls up next to me. At this point, I still hadn't forgotten what he had said about me, and I still felt really uncomfortable. He asked me if I needed a ride, and I politely said no. Then he started to laugh and asked me if I was scared of him. Of course I said no, but the truth is that I was. And he said, well, then get in the car if you're not scared of me. And I did. As we got closer to my house, he put his hand on my lap. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I pushed his hand away. Then he asked me why I was being so rude. I told him that he made me feel uncomfortable, that I just wanted to get out of the car and walk the rest of the way home. He said no because it would be dangerous for me to be by myself walking at night. He put his hand back on my lap and told me that I was really sturdy. That's when he grabbed my hand and tried to put it on his lap. Of course, I pulled my hand away really quick. Then he pulled over really fast and tried to kiss me. I was so beyond disgusted. I just started yelling. And this really took him by surprise because he must have thought that I was just gonna let him. While I was yelling at the top of my lungs, I managed to unlock the car and open the door. I basically threw myself on the ground and he started yelling at me, telling me to shut up. He tried to pull me back into the car, but at this point I was laying on the ground, so he had to pick up dead weight. He grabbed my foot and started pulling me back towards the car, but I started kicking him. He told me that I was overreacting and that he was just trying to be friendly. Luckily, a few of the neighbors heard me screaming because I was right in front of their house. They came outside and ran towards me because they saw me struggling with him. That's when the woman said that she was going to call the cops. He tried to tell the lady that I was overreacting and that he had only leaned over to put the seatbelt on, but I took it the wrong way. I told her that he tried to kiss me and she started calling the cops. That's when he drove away. I literally could not believe what had just happened. Finally, the cops arrived and so did my mom. I told them everything that happened, and I even told him that he had made a comment about me in Sarah's house a few days before that. They quickly started looking for his car and found him at a parking lot. They arrested him and he spent 2 nights in jail. His girlfriend then went to bail him out. She told the cops that he was with her and that I was just lying and that I made everything up. She even went as far as to tell the police that I had been hitting on him and that she had been a witness to it. She would even call my house at 2 in the morning and hang up. I even saw her car near my house and by my school, which means she was following me. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my best friend's dad tried to assault me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I called the police to tell him that his girlfriend was following me. That's when the cops said that I could probably get a restraining order against him and his girlfriend. Sarah and her mom came over to our house after they heard what happened. Of course, they felt really bad, but they weren't surprised. Sarah told me that that's why she never wanted me to come over because her dad had commented things about her friends before. Worst of all is that they couldn't keep him in jail for what he did to me, but a few months later he was finally put into prison because of something else he did. Apparently he had tried to steal a car or something. Remember the crazy girlfriend I told you Sarah's dad had? She kept following me for a long time. She would even show up to my school asking me if I wanted a ride home. Eventually I was able to get a restraining order against her, but she was really scary. A few years ago she tried to follow me on Instagram. I had to block and report her. I mean, what kind of woman would fight for a man like that? The good news is Sarah and I are still good friends to this day. We even went to college together and now have steady boyfriends. Even Sarah's mom remarried and she's really happy with her husband. I look back at what happened as a learning experience, but to be honest, if he ever gets out of prison, I'm scared. Shout out to my follower Remy for always supporting me and watching my lives. If you want a shout out, watch my lives to get picked. Bye. Story time about how I cheated on my husband, lied about getting pregnant, and left with all his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Oh, this is gonna be a good one, you guys. A little background, my husband and I met 2 years ago. And lucky for me, he's a wealthy plastic surgeon. So a little backstory. I actually met him because I wanted to get a nose job. I made an appointment in his office and I went. We actually hit it off right away, even though he's older than me and, you know, wasn't the best looking. After the appointment, I decided I would get the nose job. A few days later, I get a phone call. Guess who it is? It's the wealthy plastic surgeon who I just saw. He asked me out on a date and I said yes, of course. By the way, at the time I was a sugar baby, so I had a few sugar daddies. I figured he would just become another sugar daddy. He took me out to the best restaurant in town, and you better believe I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. After my surgery, he would bring me food and was just really nice. Then he asked me to be his girlfriend and I decided to give him a chance. I even broke up with 2 sugar daddies to make space for him. That's when I asked my boyfriend for an allowance. He said of course. There's so much more to the story. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, I had asked him for an allowance. Of course he said yes and offered me $3,000 a month. I accepted even though it was on the low end. By the way, I still had 1 sugar daddy at this time. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was pretty obsessed with the Kardashians. My goal in life is to look like Kim K. So now that I had a plastic surgeon boyfriend, I decided to ask him what other surgeries he thinks I could do. I already had my nose job. Now I definitely wanted to do some other stuff on my body. But when I told him, he got really upset. He said I didn't need to change anything about me and that I needed to stop looking for attention from other men. That's when I told him that would be totally impossible and that I definitely was going to keep my other sugar daddy. He totally flips out because he didn't know I had a sugar daddy. Then he asked me if I was actually in love with him. I told him that love would grow eventually, but that I really did like him. Then he started playing hard to get, like he wanted me to apologize and beg him, but I was not the type. So we ended up not speaking for a few weeks. Eventually he comes over to my apartment and asks me what surgeries I want to get done. And back to the surgery table I went. Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Well, almost all of it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So my plastic surgeon boyfriend decides to do more plastic surgery on me. But this time, it was free. We decided to get my bum done. Again, during the healing process, he was a total angel and brought me food and took care of me. Yeah, he was also paying for all of my bills and my rent this time, even though I still had a sugar daddy. And he knew it. A few months passed and he asked me to go to Italy with him. Of course I said yes. We stayed at a beautiful place in Tuscany and then he asked me to marry him. He had planned out this whole romantic dinner and of course I had to say yes. But on one condition, that I let go of my last sugar daddy. So I told him I would, although I actually did not. So we started planning my dream wedding. We finally got married and I moved into his mansion. Then he told me that I had to get pregnant right away. His excuse is that he's in his 50s and he really wants to have kids. I said I wanted to have a baby too, but I kept taking the pill. I mean, I am just not ready to have kids or to ruin my beautiful body. This is when my other sugar daddy started getting really annoyed because I never spent time with him. It was really hard being torn between 2 men. Part 4 is up. Part 4 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my sugar daddy was starting to get really annoyed at me because I never spent enough time with him. That's when I broke it to him that I was actually married. He totally flipped out, called me a user, cut me off, and blocked me from everything. So that meant I was not getting money from this sugar daddy at all. It meant I was totally dependent on my husband. Remember I said my husband wanted me to get pregnant? Well, I kept taking the pill because I didn't want to get pregnant. But my husband would ask me every single day how that was going. And I was like, it's going. I even started lying, saying that I was going to go to the baby doctor just to get myself checked, and I really wouldn't. Instead, I would go have lunch and shop. Around this time, an old sugar daddy of mine contacted me, who I still had a crush on. He was like super good looking. He offered me some money and asked me if I wanted to go on a few dates, so of course I said yes. I accepted because I really wanted to just separate myself financially from my husband. I didn't want to be dependent on him all the time. So when my husband was at work, I would go out on dates with this new sugar daddy. The sugar daddy wanted me to go on a trip with him, and I had to say no. He got really upset and started asking questions. Of course, I didn't tell him that I was married, but he started getting really suspicious. He also started to catch feelings really quick. Like he always wanted to be with me. He would text me all the time. And that's when my husband finds a text message from the sugar daddy. I basically denied everything and I told him that I no longer had any sugar daddies, but my husband did not believe me. That's when he calls my sugar daddy from my phone and tells him to leave me alone. And the sugar daddy told him that only I could make that decision. So I basically had to cut off the sugar daddy right in front of my husband. My husband was like really angry at this time. So I was on my best behavior for the next few weeks. But after a few weeks, he was still really angry. So I realized I needed to start taking money out of the account that he gave me. So I started transferring money from his account to my account. And then from my account to another account at a different bank. And guess what? My husband did not notice one bit. He had several other accounts and investments and all this other stuff, so he never really noticed if anything went missing from that one account. After a few months, I had $50,000 in that bank account. I knew it wasn't enough, so I had to start taking more money out. And then a few months after that, I was at $120,000. I knew this was enough to get me a little house somewhere and just like basically live by myself. That's when I devised a whole plan. I would leave the country and buy myself a house. I even started looking for a real estate agent in other countries. But then the poo hit the fan. My husband found my pills and asked me if I was actually trying to get pregnant or not. Once again, I started lying and I told him that of course I wanted to have a baby with him. Then he insisted we go to the doctor together. That's when he found out that I had not gone to the doctor once. He told me that if I didn't want kids, we would have to get a divorce, so I told him that I didn't want kids. That's when I told him I wanted a divorce and that I only wanted half of his stuff. He started laughing in my face and left. I knew I had to act quick because it was a matter of time before he found out I stole all that money. Story time about how my dad shot my abusive husband. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband and I met through some friends, but I never thought he was attractive or even interesting. But then I heard from other people that he would comment about how beautiful I was, and that's when he started asking me out. I kept saying no because I just didn't like him. But then he reached out to my cousin and asked her to convince me to go out with him. My cousin and I are super close and I always trusted her judgment. So I finally said yes to one date. I was in nursing school at the time, so I was really busy and actually really broke. So he paid for dinner and he even offered to help me pay my bills. I couldn't believe he was being so generous, but obviously at the time I didn't realize that he was just trying to control me. Here's where it gets really scary. 2 months later, he actually took me out on a date, and it was our wedding. That's right, he planned a whole wedding, got my parents' permission and everything. I show up to this date thinking we were gonna have dinner, but then he put me in a freaking wedding gown. I felt like I had no other choice, so I said yes. 2 weeks after we got married, he completely changed. He was totally abusive. He started brainwashing me to not even see my family. Part 2 is up. After my husband forced me into marrying him, he became a totally different person. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. He started brainwashing me into believing that I could never leave him, and that no one could ever love me, and he even started convincing me that my family hated me. It was just his way to keep me away from them. But my entire family had enough, especially my dad. My dad was a cop and he had dealt with a lot of abusive husbands in the past. So one night my dad comes to our very big, very beautiful house, and he asked my husband to let me go. That's when my husband grabs a bat from behind the door and starts swinging at my dad. My dad, being a cop, had his gun on him. He pulled it out and shot him in the you-know-what. That's when he looked at me and said that he would kill me if I left. Part 3 is up. My dad pulls his gun out and shoots my husband in the you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My husband falls to the ground, looks at me and says that if I leave the house, he would kill me. But of course, I ran straight to my dad and we went home. My dad called an ambulance and they went to get my husband. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I never went to visit him once. I was so grateful to my dad for getting me out of that abusive relationship. But guess what? The abuse hasn't ended. My husband is suing me for abandonment. He's got his lawyers visiting me every single day, harassing me. I've noticed one man who keeps following me, and my car was broken into 2 nights ago. There's so much more, I think I'll have to make a follow-up story time. My dad is doing everything possible to get the divorce, and we're also trying to get a restraining order against my husband. I actually recently found pictures that I had taken of my bruises, so now I've got proof. Should I do a part 4?